Yes, sir. We are live now.
Okay, thank you. Now I think English will be the common language. Only one or two persons are who speak in Hindi. So we will all are free either to speak in Hindi or English. All, but there may be some problems or Veronica and the other one William but are there will not be able to. So
नारायण जी
I
आप ब्रेकअप हो रहे हैं और बैकग्राउंड में नॉइज बहुत है। बैकग्राउंड में नॉइज बहुत है।
नॉइज तो बैकग्राउंड में देखिए नीरज जी आप बैकग्राउंड देखिए
हाँ
मैं
हाँ सर, आप बोलिए। अब ठीक है सर। अब ठीक है
अब
सर,
ठीक है,
बोलिए।
अब ठीक है।
जी।
मैं आप सबों का हार्दिक अभिनंदन करता हूँ धन्यवाद कांग्रेस की तरफ से आप आए इसके लिए हम लोग बहुत ही वेलकम यू ऑल हियर ऑन बिहाफ
It's
ऑफ
breaking.
गवर्नमेंट एंड वी आर वेरी मच थैंकफुल टू यू फॉर ज्वाइनिंग अस ऑन एन इम्पॉर्टेंट discussion that is on Mahatma Gandhi his contribution in global peace perspective. So we had a, I will just take 2 minutes of what we did in last 3 days. We have decided to hold this program webinar only for one day, but the response was so overwhelming that we decided that we will split it in 4 days. So we will split it in 4 days, and in each day we had participants from abroad and almost 4 or 6 from India. So likewise, the first day was on 8th of August, on which day it was inaugurated by Honorable Chief Minister of Chhattisgarh, Sri Badel ji. He practices Gandhi in his life. In his personal life, he is practicing Gandhi and he is trying to introduce Gandhian principles of economic development in his state, cottage economy, cottage industry economy, and all that he is doing. That's what he told on that day. He said that there is a program which he launched that day itself. That was the Uber plan, buying Uber and giving money and making all that. So he explained about all that, and then on the second day, then on that day, we had a Professor Oleg from Israel, and Professor Oleg explained about the practical aspect of the Gandhi's principles and philosophy and how he is in using all those in his life and in his society and also in the country. He has given one suggestion that let us have a center or a center for peace, uh, Gandhi peace and disarmament. So we have we considered his suggestion a good one, and we are working on that. That will be shared by with all of you when we will complete that. Then Veronica from Venezuela, she explained about the her experiences and her experiment which she is doing there with by taking children for a particular time and practicing allowing them to practicing Gandhian way of living of life, all that she said. Then there was after that there was that was the about the first day, and the second day, no, on that day, Mr. William Westerman was also there, and he talked about the uh, uh, activist activity in US with Gandhian principle. How the activists are act, uh, supporting back there in USA. Then there was another speaker, Poncho. He is an anthropologist, but he is practicing in Mexico and Latin America on the art, craft, music, all that he is teaching on his principle and is trying to improve the socio-economic condition of the people. Then there was a next day on 15th of August, we had Arun Anand. He talked about the uh, Gandhiwadi Arthashastra, and in that he said how India can be self-reliant uh, from Gandhian economic principles. Then there was the next day on 22nd, we had Anandvardhan Sinha and Bhairav Lal Das, A.K. Pandey. They all spoke on the Gandhi and his principles, which are very much familiar, and people are trying to adopt that. And in that case, and the third one was in which Professor Mitasri Mitra, Dr. Jyoti Bindal, Vijay Prakash, Vijay Sahai, Dr. Shivani, and Sunil Dubey and Bhadra Bhan. They all explained about in their own way how they are practicing Gandhi's basic principle in their life and how they think that with that they can achieve uh, the agenda of peace in terms of global peace. So that's all which we did in last 3 days. So we welcome you all, and today we have two great speakers, rather say three great speakers who will speak on Gandhiji. The first is Tushar Gandhiji, who is with us. He will be giving us a good input for thought for the world peace, global peace. Then we have DP Sinha Saab. He is a former IPS and a very senior officer. Now he is in Suchna Ayog. And now I will request. Then there is one lady, one professor, Shobha Kuchur. Comes from a tribe which is known as Tana Bhagat. Tana Bhagat are the follower of Gandhiji. Gandhiji stayed with them in 2 days, for 2 days. I will give you detail about after the lecture of Tushar Gandhiji because we are waiting to hear him. Neeraj, give the formal introduction of.
Yes, sir. Sir, I think we should start with Gandhi Bhajan.
Ah,
Yeah, so I request Sonali Karanji, who is there here. Sonali Karanji is from Delhi, and I request Sonali Karanji to start the proceeding with the Gandhi Bhajan. Kindly unmute yourself. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, fine.
First of all, I would like to thank you, the honorable speakers, and thank you so much for inviting me to join this webinar. And I'm going to start with the Gandhi Bhajan, which is Vaishnava Janto Tene Kahiye.
Yeah, sure.
वैष्णव जन तो तेने कहे जे पीर पराए जाने रे वैष्णव जन तो तेने कहे जे पीर पराए जाने रे पर दुखे उपकार करे तो ये मन अभिमान नाड़े रे वैष्णव जन तो तेने कहे जे पीर पराई जाने रे सकल लोक मां सहुने वंदे निंदा ना करे के निरे सकल लोक मां सहुने बंदे, निंदा ना करे के नीरे, वाच काच मन निश्चल राखे, वाच काछ मन निश्चल राखे, धन धन जननी तेनी रे, वैष्णव जन तो तेने कही जे, पीर पराई जाने रे, वैष्णव जन तो तेने कही जे।
बहुत बढ़िया, बहुत बढ़िया।
थैंक यू सो मच, थैंक यू सो मच
Thank
ऑल
you,
ऑफ यू।
thank you very much, Sonali ji.
Yeah,
So
thank you so
uh,
much.
now I will like to call uh, Honorable Tushar Gandhi ji for his inaugural address. Tushar Gandhi is the managing trustee of Mahatma Gandhi Foundation, great grandson of late Mahatma Gandhi ji, and director of Gandhi Research Foundation, Maharashtra. So we request Tushar Gandhi ji for his inaugural address.
I just wanted to ask, how much time do I have?
Around 15-20 minutes, or sir.
Okay.
Or you can
Thank you.
take half an hour. You can take half an hour.
Okay.
For him,
Thank you so much. So thank you very much for this opportunity to for me to speak at this webinar. It is immensely necessary that today we all propagate Bapu's ideals in whatever manner we can. Can you hear me?
Yeah, yeah,
yes,
yes.
yes, we can hear you.
Okay, fine. So, in whatever manner that
We
we
are able
can
to hear you.
do that, and in particularly in times where normal life has been suspended and we are all living in a kind of a artificial situation that we are not used to. These are the ideologies that help us cope with the situation that we are dealt with, because this situation itself comes with a lot of challenges that we as individuals and as society will face. And so it is very essential that we learn to uh, cope with this and we get inspired by the ideologies. I believe very firmly that we don't need the Mahatma anymore. We don't require the Mahatma. The Mahatma is somebody who is actually a detriment to understand the ideology. What we need to do is to understand the normal human being that Mohandas Gandhi was, and how he became what he achieved. How did he achieve that? And the philosophy and ideology that evolved with that human being is, I think, much more important for us to understand when we talk about any of his ideologies, whether it is of world peace, whether it is of equality, whether it is of empowerment, whether it is of honor, whether it is of truth. They're all interlinked. There's nothing standalone. You can't compartmentalize Gandhi into these various facets that we love to compartmentalize our leaders into, where we want to put them in a box and only look at them through that compartment of the box. For Gandhi, it doesn't work, because unless you understand the overall ideology of Gandhi, you are only going to be able to see and understand one facet of that person. And the journey can only begin if you start looking at him as an ordinary human being, or a human being who was on a journey of improvement and a journey of self actualization, which he kept achieving. He is the only person who had the courage to call his entire life an experiment. And I think that is the basis of understanding Gandhi. where we must understand that he evolved through his experiences and his experiments, and was able to understand what was wrong and what was right. And that is where he also said another very courageous statement, that if in his lifetime he expressed diametrically opposite views on one subject, then people who were studying him should believe what he said towards the end or later part of his life, because life would have taught him through experience that the opinion he held initially was wrong, and he was willing to change. That flexibility of the person is what made him what he eventually became. And so I very firmly believe that first we must free him of this imprisonment of the Mahatma and start understanding Mohandas. Even when we talk about world peace, we have to understand it from the fact that world peace cannot be achieved without truth, and not the convenient truth, because today we have turned, faceted the truth into what is convenient to us and what is not convenient to us. And we believe that only the version that is convenient to us of truth is the truth, and there's nothing beyond that. Whereas Bapu talked about the eternal truth, the truth of life, the existence of life, the survival of life, the truth that never changed, the fundamental truth. And unless we accept that, we cannot talk about world peace, because world peace comes from first truth, understanding, respect, justice, and equality. Unless we go through those steps, we cannot ever think about achieving world peace. Today, the greatest threat to world peace is narrow parochialism, the nationalism that we are being told is very good, the very narrow patriotism, the definition of patriotism that we are being told that we must be nationalist. When we become nationalist, we cease to remain humanists, because then we are again putting ourselves in a box, and we have to come out of that box to encompass humanity and life in general. It's not only enough to be peaceful with humanity. We have to be now peaceful with all forms of life that whoever created life and this universe created in this universe. We have to respect the right of every life to coexist and thrive in our universe as much as we have that right to exist and thrive and develop. Just yesterday was brought to my notice that under the guise of modernizing Wardha, trees on the roads in Sevagram and Wardha were being chopped. And the first thing that came to my mind was that these were the trees which provided shade to Ba and Bapu. These were the trees that were witness to the evolution of Sevagram, to the ideology of Gandhi. And isn't murdering those trees murdering Gandhi's ideologies? But the counter argument is that we need to widen the roads so that more people can visit Sevagram and get inspired by that. What is an inspiration which is based on destruction? And then how can there be peace if we are only going to achieve it through destroying other forms of life which we don't hold as important ourselves, as we hold ourselves and our well-being? Life, if it has to become peaceful and beneficial, it has to benefit every life form. We must respect every life form and give them the space that they rightfully deserve in our universe. That is the kind of peace that Gandhi talked about. And that is why I refuse to refer to him as Mahatma. Because Mahatma has put him on a pedestal and made it very convenient for all of us to not attempt to emulate him. And it is the greatest disservice that is being done, has been done to Gandhi, the human being, that we put him on a pedestal, we garland his statue, and we even spit on that statue when it is convenient for us. But we do not bother to walk on the path that that man walked, the path of life that that one walked. And that is where even our worshipping Gandhi becomes a hypocrisy. And that is the greatest disadvantage to world peace that there is hypocrisy of human beings. Because if you look at it today from the point of view of the Black Lives Matter movement that is sweeping the West, began in the US and now sweeping the West, we realize that it arises from an injustice which has been left unaddressed for so long. We believed that after Dr. King's movement for equal rights, racism was a thing of the past. But racism raised its spectre when a black president was sworn in into USA, and the white supremacists thought it as a threat in their land, which they claimed to be their land, the US, which they created out of anything. Selfishness was is what causes that racial attitude, whether it is towards black, whether it is towards the new immigrants who migrate to the US, whether it is towards the Hispanics who are supposed to be criminal. All of them are criminals and rodents who are gnawing away at the fabric of the US. If the current president is to be believed. But isn't the current president of the US patriotic, nationalist? He believes, he keeps talking about making US great. Which US is he talking about making great? The US that believes was formed on the principle of liberty and equality, or the US that was found on the principles of slave labor and exploiting people for the benefit of the few? That is what is needed to be understood. And if that is the attitude, will ever justice be done on an equality basis to all the citizens of the world? But the Black Lives Matter movement is also on a dangerous path, because at the present moment, the anger within the community is threatening to overpower it, and it seems to be responding to hate with equal hate, reciprocity of hate. But reciprocity of hate only helps in increasing hate, will not diminish or decrease that hate in any ways. And if hate doesn't decrease, peace cannot be established and cannot survive. So, somewhere or the other, that chain of hatred will have to be broken. We must realize that not everybody is evolved enough, but we cannot look at them with contempt. It is our responsibility, if we realize that a person is intellectually not evolved enough or spiritually not evolved enough, then we help that person in reaching that stage of evolution or awakening where enlightenment can happen. We may not all become Mahatmas, but if we work together in what the African spirit of Ubuntu talks about, then we can help each other becoming better. And then, as a consequence, the world will become better. Look at what we are doing to the environment. Even when we see the direct effects of environment damage and weather change and global warming, we are busy pointing fingers at others of the irresponsibility of the others. And we are sort of saying that if they were allowed to be irresponsible, why don't you allow us to be irresponsible? But look at the dangerous argument over there. And then think about what Gandhi talked about of lessening one's needs and becoming less of a consumer and more of a producer, even for our ecology. And look at that as peace with our environment, peaceful coexistence with our environment. And then we understand that it just doesn't merely mean that we don't damage the environment. What it means is we also help the environment to thrive, to develop as much as we want ourselves to develop. And that is where the cost of cutting even one tree for widening a road will become unacceptable. And that is when we will truly become peaceful. When we extend our peacefulness to other forms of life. We have to understand this. We have to make the change that we have to become that change. Unless we become that change, world is not going to change. That is what Gandhi did. Mohandas changed, and with him he brought about a whole new revolution of change. He helped liberate his people. But his greatest failure was the inability to establish an equal society. There, the established society defeated his most noble intentions. And that is where we see that in our country and in the world, we see how inequality thrives and how development is linked directly to the success of becoming an unequal society, an inadequate society where people are oppressed in the name of development so that the few can benefit and become better off. But is that sustainable? That is not sustainable because that creates the future troubles and the threat to the sustainability of peace, which Gandhi understood in his lifetime and worked till his last breath towards it. But the greatest disservice to Gandhi was done by people who claim to be his disciples because they, in making their own selves important, they became the priests of Gandhi and they created a whole atmosphere which signified that only they understood Gandhi. And if you wanted to understand Gandhi or learn about Gandhi, you had to go through them only. Forgetting the fact that Gandhi can be learned only by going on the journey of knowledge and exploration on your own self. The self reliance that Gandhi talked about was in the quest of knowledge also, in the quest of enlightenment also, where one would be self reliant, where one would be a seeker oneself and not depend on anybody else to guide them. Because when you depend on others to guide you, there is a likelihood that you will reach the destination they want and not the destination that you started off seeking. And so that is where the greatest disservice to Gandhi was done. He was put on a pedestal. A whole class of priests, the Gandhians, emerged who made the world believe that they were the custodians of the Gandhi legacy and they were the only qualified people to talk on Gandhi because nobody else except them would be able to understand Gandhi. And that is where merely 75 years or less from the time when Gandhi was no longer in our midst physically, we have debates about his relevance and whether he can be relevant in the contemporary sense. And there again, we have a whole tribe of experts who will either argue that he no longer is relevant, or people like me who will desperately try to keep arguing that no, he will always be relevant. There too, there is a selfishness because if Gandhi doesn't remain relevant, how will his great grandson ever be relevant? So my personal selfish need to self promote myself also makes Gandhi into a tool. So we need to break out of this entire mindset of the Brahmins of Gandhi. There are no Brahmins of Gandhi. Gandhi treated everybody as Harijans. And we must become those Harijans. Seekers for justice, seekers for equality, seekers for knowledge, our own self. Then we will truly understand Gandhi. And that is where my life's quest has been to free Mohandas from the imprisonment of Mahatma. Because the Mahatma is a tool of exploitation. And you see it. The insincere exploitation of Gandhi in independent India and right till today is criminal. It is what makes or weakens the legacy of Gandhi. Because self seekers will associate with him in a certain manner for a certain period of time for their own selfish benefits without an iota of honesty in their claimed devotion. And that is what has harmed the persona of the Mahatma and made him irrelevant for the present day generations. We have to liberate, and I continuously keep saying this, that Mohandas needs to be liberated from the Mahatma. And we must learn to understand the Mohandas, the ordinary human beings, and attempt to find elements of that Mohandas within our own self. And if we start and if we have the courage to go on that journey, then we will finally end up becoming better people and subsequently make a better nation, a better earth, a better civilization, a better humanity, a better environment. That is what is important today. Rediscovering Mohandas, because we forgot Mohandas in that huge presence of the Mahatma. And we kept inflating that presence of the Mahatma so that it would be very convenient to one day declare him to be a god, an avatar, and then never having to emulate him. So please, let us today embark on a journey of first ourselves understanding Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, then maybe the journey of a sustainable, peaceful society will begin. And we may, in our lifetimes, be able to achieve that destination that is so elusive, so feels so elusive today, especially in the times of Corona, where the greatest danger is if humanity learns to become socially distanced. Remember one thing, untouchability came out of that social distancing itself. Inequality came out of that social distancing itself, where we did not consider those that we did not consider as being part of us, as having the right to even exist. Social distancing is a need of the present time temporarily. We have to go back to becoming inclusive and compassionate of all life forms after this crisis of corona is over. And if the earth is going to heal post corona, if life is going to heal post corona, then the legacy of Mohandas Gandhi will be the only panacea that will cure us and heal us and mend us. And that is what we must prepare for. So, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to speak to all of you. I don't know if you plan to have a dialogue in this. It would have been lovely if we had a dialogue, if we have the time. But thank you very much, Professor Narayan, and all the members who organized this and gave me this opportunity. I don't know whether I deserve to be amongst this galaxy of speakers, but thank you very much again. One thing that you have honored me with is this is the first time that I am speaking at a webinar whose valedictory address will be delivered by my father, Arun Gandhi. So thank you very much for that also.
Thank you very much. We are very much thankful to you for giving time to us, and we are very much thankful to you, and you have spoken and given us a guideline that Karamchand Gandhi, Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi is always relevant. So we will rethink on it that that relevant term should not be used in future. And example which you gave for Patna, I just want to tell you that Gandhi's experiment in Champaran has even today it has impact. There is a tribal group called Tharu. So while making a documentary on Gandhiji, I had been to those tribes.
Your
And
voice is breaking up, Professor Narayanan.
so
नारायण
I
सर,
had been to that. I had been to Champaran,
आप स्पीकर
and there is
स्पीकर को अपने माउथ के पास कर लीजिए, बोलते समय में स्पीकर को माउथ के पास कर।
tribal community called Tharu. The women folk of the Tharu are still waiting for Gandhiji. They say that Gandhiji has given the freedom to the country. But what you said, the equality, they said that we want economic freedom. We want social freedom. That we are waiting for Gandhiji. I do not know whether
I
you had gone to those tribes or not. If you have not gone, then I will arrange a trip for you so that
I
they
had
will be very happy to see you.
I had visited Champaran when the centenary of the Champaran Satyagraha was being celebrated.
Yeah, yeah.
It felt as if I had traveled in time, back in time, because what I saw in Motihari and parts of Champaran made me believe that it hadn't moved ahead since the time that my great grandparents were over
Hmm.
there. The
Yeah, very.
disparity between where I lived, in the part of India where I lived, and what I found in Champaran was so stark, and it was shocking that for 100 years I was not even aware of the fact that people in Champaran still live and still wait for another Gandhi to come to
Yeah,
bring them out of the situation they find themselves in. It's
yeah.
shameful, and the most shameful aspect was that in Patna they had organized an event to celebrate the centenary of the Champaran Satyagraha, where all the VIP participants were given a charkha plated with gold, and it was the most telling statement of what we have done to Gandhi today. Unfortunately,
Yeah. Now, if anybody has any question to ask from him, it's open for him. Because,
जी सर, जी
uh,
सर,
you can
मैं
unmute
तुषार
the
गांधी
participants. Haji,
मैं तुषार गांधी साहब से एक अनुरोध करना चाहूंगा, एक सूचना भी देना चाहूंगा। जो अभी भी थारू जनजाति महात्मा गांधी के अलावे और किसी नेता को या जनप्रतिनिधि को जानते भी नहीं है। ये भी एक आश्चर्य की बात है, जो 100 साल के बाद भी चंपारण के थारू जनजाति महात्मा गांधी को वैसे ही याद कर रहे हैं जैसे वो 1917 में मिले थे। एक चीज। दूसरी चीज, महात्मा गांधी और कस्तूरबा के द्वारा स्थापित चंपारण में जो 3 आश्रम हैं, एक बरहड़वा लखनसेन, एक भितरवा और एक मधुबन। भितरवा में कस्तूरबा गांधी की यादें अभी भी वैसी ही रखी हुई हैं। मेरा अनुरोध होगा तुषार गांधी साहब से, वो जब पटना आए थे तो मैं उनसे मिला था मौर्या होटल में। मेरा अनुरोध होगा कि एक बार पुनः वो चंपारण आए और कुछ दिनों के लिए आए, ताकि चंपारण के लोगों में महात्मा गांधी की जो यादें बसी हुई हैं वो फिर से ताजा हो जाएं। और जो हमारा वेबिनार का एक पर्पस है, एक उद्देश्य है, जो गांधी के आदर्शों को पुनः जनजागरण में स्थापित करना, उसमें हमें सहायता मिलेगी और शायद उन्हें भी
जरूर
सहायता मिलेगी।
जरूर बैगम
धन्यवाद।
जी, मैं कबूल करता हूँ। मैं ये मानता हूँ कि अगर वहाँ के जो लोग हैं वो आज भी बापू को याद करते हैं और मानते हैं, तो ये इस कारण है कि बापू ने ना सिर्फ वहाँ सत्याग्रह किया था, पर उन्होंने उस सत्याग्रह के साथ साथ रचनात्मक कार्य को भी उतना ही
महत्व दिया था,
महत्व दिया
उतना
था
ही
और
महत्व
उसको
दिया था।
चलाया था। हाँ, और चलाया था। और उसका नतीजा है कि आज 100 साल बाद भी लोग उस वक्त के उस रचनात्मक कार्य के प्रयास को मानते हैं, जो कस्तूरबा ने बापू के बाद भी चलाया था। जब बापू
हाँ,
खेड़ा
बिल्कुल।
आ गए थे, उनका खेड़ा के सत्याग्रह में सरदार पटेल के साथ सहभागी होने, तब कस्तूरबा वहां रही थी और भितियरवा आश्रम में वो किया था। भितियरवा आश्रम की भी जो परिस्थिति है उससे मैं वाकिफ हूँ। कई बार सरकारों से उसकी इल्तिजा भी की है, लेकिन कुछ आगे बढ़ता नहीं है। पर मैं समझता हूँ कि इन स्मारकों से ज्यादा उनके काम को अगर याद किया जाए और आज उस काम से प्रेरणा लेकर हम फिर से वो काम करें तो उससे क्या बहुत ज्यादा उसका नतीजा मिलेगा। और मैं चाहता हूं कि चंपारण आके जिस जहां जहां से बा और बापू गुजरे थे उन सारी जगहों पे मैं भी जाकर घूमूं और वहां के लोगों के साथ मिलूं। जब नॉर्मल सी आ जाएगी तो वो सबसे पहला कार्य मैं जरूर करना चाहूँ।
बिल्कुल आपका आपका
जी बहुत
स्वागत है।
धन्यवाद सर। मैं
आप,
आपकी
शुक्रिया।
आपका
प्रतीक्षा
स्वागत है।
करूंगा।
आप जब फ्री हो जाएं और ये अभी का समय निकल जाए तो आप बता देंगे, तो मैं आपके लिए वहाँ आपको ले चलूंगा,
जरूर
आपके साथ चलूंगा
जरूर।
और वो सारी जगहों को आपको दिखा दूंगा। और जो थारू जनजाति हैं उनमें कैसे बा ने उनको सिखाया था, स्वच्छता का पाठ पढ़ाया था, खाना बनाना सिखाया था, लिखना सिखाया था। और आपको आश्चर्य होगा कि आज भी थारू जनजाति की जो महिलाएं हैं वो चरखा चलाकर उससे सूत से जो कपड़ा बनाती हैं, वो उनके आजीविका का एक बहुत महत्वपूर्ण साधन है। और वो
बिल्कुल
उसी से वो अपना जीवन चलाती हैं। और प्राय 4-5 गांवों के बीच में वैसा एक कॉमन चरखा बड़ा सा है जिससे वो कपड़ा बनाती हैं। मैं वो सब आपको
बिल्कुल।
दिखाऊंगा, वो आप
जरूर
देखेंगे तो।
जरूर जरूर।
आपको धन्यवाद।
बहुत शुक्रिया
नेक्स्ट
आपका।
स्पीकर,
Yes. So,
नेक्स्ट स्पीकर करिए आप।
thank you very much, sir. Now I would like to invite respected Divya Prakash Sinha, sir. Divya Prakash Sinha, sir, is the Central Informational Commissioner. He is 1979 batch IPS officer, and he has worked extensively for Intelligence Bureau at various ranks. He had been to High Commission of India in Sri Lanka also in past. So I request Divya Prakash Sinha for his special address.
Thank you very much. I am really very honored to be speaking after Shri Tushar Gandhi, and I must start my address by telling that Gandhi ji is very much relevant, especially in public service and he in our day to day life. I am in a webinar on Gandhian thought. Actually, my experience is limited only to practicing the philosophy of Gandhi in my day to day public life. I recall that when I was preparing for the civil services in the late 70s, in our general knowledge paper, we had a portion on Gandhian thoughts. So at that time, it was the effort of the government to inculcate the philosophy of Gandhiji in the future civil servants. And our first exposure on Gandhian thought was at that time when we started reading books on the philosophy and the practices of Gandhiji. I still remember to have read written by the great Shriman Narayan, a Gandhian who had very beautifully listed out the philosophies of Gandhiji, which I still remember and sometimes I also follow in my day to day public life. Thoughts and attitude of an individual plays a great role in shaping his personality as well as approach towards society. Tushar Gandhi ji also spoke on these lines. And Gandhian philosophy, which appears very simple to everyone, but when we start practicing it in day to day life, we meet many hurdles and obstacles. Practicing tolerance, truth, non-violence, and respecting others in different circumstances of life calls for great degree of commitment. Shri Tushar Gandhi ji has also mentioned that if we follow the principles of Gandhi ji, our society will not have any problem, and the question of equality, inequality will all disappear. Gandhi ji believed in the Buddhist philosophy of three pillars: right wisdom, right effort, and right goal to attain the essence of life and public service today be based on the above principles. But because the public service has to address the issues of a common man in an ethical and democratic way towards for working towards their emancipation, especially of the poor and downtrodden. Everybody sees that lakhs of crores of rupees have been spent on lifting the economic condition of the poorest of the poor, the Antyodaya, we can say, the the last ladder in our society. But where have they come? Have we been able to achieve our objective? Has the government been able to achieve its objective? No. We have to look into the reasons. Gandhi just said that earth has enough for human needs, but not for human greed. It is a very, very relevant saying of Gandhiji today. What we see in today's society is that greed has overtaken everything. Public servants, before joining the service, they start calculating how much they are going to earn while
राज
they are
नीचे
in
जा जाना,
service.
देखना ना कुछ पीने का मिलेगा, कोल्ड ड्रिंक्स वगैरह, वो नींबू वगैरह मिलेगा।
Huh.
सॉरी सर।
Huh. So I was telling that greed has no limits, and it is that greed which has taken the public servants on this road that we have not been able to address the problems of the poor and downtrodden. You see, we have CBI, we have ED, we have vigilance. Every agency is engaged in every agency is engaged in rooting out, stamping out corruption in public life. We see raids being conducted in the premises of the public servants. Crores of rupees, tons of gold are recovered. From where have they got? All this money was meant for the welfare schemes of the poor people. So Gandhiji's principle that greed has no limit, here it is very, very relevant. Human behavior destroys the nature, and human greed and dishonesty does not allow the welfare fund of the government to percolate to the lowest level. Gandhiji always said to exercise self control. It is very much needed. It is very much needed in today's context. And moral cleansing, what starting right from Gautam Buddha to Gandhi, every social thinker has uh, has spoken on moral cleansing. Unless we are clean morally, we will not be able to do public service. So This is especially relevant for the public servants and the budding public servants. I am speaking this on my on the basis of my experience of now. Now it is 41 years in the public service. I want to speak something on my other professional interest. I have been associated with counter-terrorism in my professional life. You all must be knowing that we are facing the problem of terrorism, in which we are fighting a battle where the enemy is not known. It is an asymmetric war. You have to succeed 100 times, they have to succeed once. So, Gandhiji's principle that the means to achieve end should always be followed is sometimes not very much followed in the field of counter terrorism. I remember to have read a letter written to the inmates of Sabarmati Ashram, where they were facing the problem of wild animals and other uh, other factors beyond their control, and they were not able to control them by the normal methods. They were not able to control. I want to just read four lines. As regards stray cattle and insects which damage our crops, we have not been able to devise non-violent methods of dealing with them. We therefore do some violence to them, and them out of sheer helplessness. So these are the words which I have sometimes followed in my professional life. Your end has to be clean, but sometimes you feel that when the situation goes out of control, you have to also compromise to some extent. The Right to Information Act, which came to India in 2005, it was promulgated in 2005, and currently I am adjudicating at the highest level of the RTI appeals at the central government level. What I have found that Gandhi's guidance on on the principles of approach of achieving any government decision, the approach has to be clean, and this instrument, Right to Information Acts, gives you an opportunity to know about the processes as to how a decision has been achieved in the government, and it is very relevant today in the context of Gandhian principles of ends and means, because I always feel that when the government has taken a decision, that is the end product, but the means it has applied to arrive at that decision will be available in correspondences, in files, which are now accessible under the RTI Act. And one can be sure that the government is also following the principles of Gandhiji in achieving its end. I do not want to take much time because much has been written on different facets of Gandhian philosophy, and a general discussion will take long time. I just wanted to flag 2 points on counterterrorism and probity in public life in my special address. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, for giving me this opportunity in speaking before such an august gathering. Thank you.
थैंक यू वेरी मच डीपी सिन्हा साहब। आप आए, ये बहुत ही खुशी की बात है हम लोगों के लिए कि आप हम लोगों के बीच आए, और हम आपका बहुत ही धन्यवाद ज्ञापन करते हैं कि आपने बहुत अच्छी बात बताई इंफॉर्मेशन कमीशन के बारे में और काउंटर टेररिज्म के बारे में। तो हम समझते हैं कि ये एक अच्छी बात है। अगर कोई ऑब्जर्वेशन हो तो आप पूछ सकते हैं। इफ देयर इज एनी ऑब्जर्वेशन वन इज फ्री टू मेक इट। Otherwise, we will move to next speaker. नीरज जी, नीरज जी,
माइक ऑन कीजिए नीरज जी। हाँ,
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
हाँ आप
जी.
नेक्स्ट स्पीकर की तरफ चलें।
Yes, yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you very much, Divya Prakash Sinha, sir. So our next speaker is Veronica Rodriguez Gurcia. Um, uh, she is the president of the Foundation Mahatma Gandhi in Venezuela. The best thing about her is her foundation has tied up with Metropolitan University and Central University of Venezuela for diploma courses on non-violence and other teachings of Mahatma Gandhi in Venezuela's universities. So I would like to invite Veronica for her address. Yeah, kindly unmute yourself. Kindly unmute yourself.
Thank you.
Yeah, fine.
Hello, everybody. Greetings from Caracas, Venezuela. Um, Today is the closing session of this wonderful and inspiring international webinar series. I would like to congratulate the Society for Empowerment for organizing these 4 sessions of international webinar regarding the relevance of Mahatma Gandhi in contemporary scenario. I would also like to thank Professor Narajan for inviting me to participate and share with you the experience through the work of Mahatma Gandhi, Venezuela. I feel truly honored to have been once again invited to be among such prestigious speakers. First, because there are some new speakers, I would like just to talk to you a little bit about our organization. Mahatma Gandhi Venezuela is an NGO, non-for-profit, created in 2016 in partnership with Mahatma Gandhi Foundation India, with the leadership of Tushar Gandhi, great-grandson of Gandhiji, that we've heard today, to promote the legacy of Mahatma Gandhi. We have implemented more than 100 workshops and reached more than 2,800 people from all walks of life, with an emphasis in low-income communities and children. We also run a university course at Universidad Metropolitana in Caracas, which is called Nonviolence as a Way of Life. For Mahatma Gandhi Venezuela, it has been an honor to have had sustained sponsorship since its launching from the Embassy of India in Venezuela and all their prestigious ambassadors. We have undoubtedly been blessed to have as our advisor, Dr. Arun Gandhi ji. And as we have come along 4 years already, it has been really an ongoing learning experience, which we value and exercise from our hearts. This webinar series has been an extraordinary opportunity to share experiences from different parts of the world. In such challenging times that the world is living today, in particular with the COVID-19 pandemic, these spaces to share practices and reflections from which we can learn are very valuable. Throughout the sessions, we have heard personal experiences, historic references, and best practices. And as we have heard today, Tushar, to make um, awareness on what really Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi gave to humanity: his leadership, his philosophy, his humanity, and his beliefs in the capacity of humanity for transformation. So, not only the relevance of Gandhiji today we have seen in this seminar, but all in India, but also worldwide. Whether it is the issue relates to political change and Gandhiji's nonviolent strategic approach is applicable, to a range of issues related to coping with everyday life challenges and better ways to communicate with one another amidst these challenging times. And the conclusion is clear. His life inspires us and becomes more relevant than ever to address these turbulent times where we feel fragile, following Gandhi's footsteps. While there is injustice, inequality, and discrimination in the world, Gandhi's principles and teachings will be relevant. I strongly believe that Mahatma Gandhi can never and will never be irrelevant. From Mahatma Gandhi Venezuela, we believe that education on these values and the daily practice of them should be taught in schools from early ages. In our experience at Mahatma Gandhi Venezuela with a program called Living Together in Peace, we teach and practice the 5 pillars of nonviolence, a practical tool to start reviewing our ways to relate to others, beautifully explained in Arun Gandhi's latest book, The Gift of Anger. We have worked 2 consecutive years with 125 children from preschool up to second grade, and we have seen the changes in their behavior and the positive influence in the parents. Furthermore, the parents have expressed their gratitude on how helpful these practices have been at this strenuous confinement time of COVID-19. So, teaching the practice of ahimsa or nonviolence in our daily lives will open paths towards harmony, inner peace, and protection of our environment. My invitation to you all is to follow Gandhiji's footsteps and let your life and your beliefs evolve through experimenting with nonviolence. Thank you once again, Society for Empowerment, to have provided light and guidance through these magnificent speakers, not only on the relevance, but the need of Bapu's teachings and practices to promote a healthier and more humane global society. Thank you very much.
नारायण सर प्लीज अनम्यूट कर लीजिए.
Any questions? I'll be gladly to answer.
Thank you.
नारायण सर आप अपने आप को अनम्यूट कर लीजिए. नारायण सर अनम्यूट कर लीजिए खुद को.
Tushar, you have a question for me.
वो 1 minute 1 minute.
Your microphone, please. There.
I have a request, Vero. Why don't you talk about the current campaign run by Senderos about the peaceful coexistence? A little bit of that would be very interesting to be spoken about in this space also. A little information about what the peaceful coexistence program
Sure. Thank
is
you.
all
Sure.
about.
I would love to. We have currently a campaign on Instagram and Facebook. It is called Weaving the Thread of Peace. It's an ongoing, it's going to be 12 weeks. We are already ending the third week of the campaign. And what we are trying to accomplish at this point is to connect with youth and especially targeted to youth and women in low-income communities with the concept and the legacy of Gandhi and the culture of peace in general. So therefore, we explore, and we've been kind of teaching through the campaign, which you can follow. I'll write to you um, the link. The difference is that the tools that people could have so that in their everyday life they can practice Mohandas Gandhi's um, teachings. So we work with them about the 5 pillars of understanding, respect, acceptance, appreciation, and compassion. And then we also will start now nonviolent communication. And so we start to link. Actually, it's also even a challenge now of writing an essay about peace. So what the objective is to visualize that there are tools out there to tackle our difficulties, especially today with the confinement that COVID-19 has done to all of us, but and our mental health issues that have become as a consequence of that. But if we relate, and we sometimes feel so very alone, but if we relate with one another with these 5 pillars, for example, then we start engaging in a different manner with one another. So this I really encourage you, and I thank you, Tushar, for letting me uh, uh, express this campaign, which is an ongoing thing. And even though it's in Spanish, well, actually, you can have first there are beautiful pictures, and also you have Google Translator just in case to translate whatever the message is there. But the importance is that we are using the media to connect with each other, to give ourselves of coexistence, a sense of coexistence. We need to embrace each other and with love, with understanding, because each one of us is in our own boat in this COVID-19. Some are in a little canoe, some are in a good yacht, because sometimes we have more tools to tackle this personal, individual, and um, family tools to help you with it. But we're all in this. So the campaign is trying to reach to each one of us and see that there are these tools, look at them, practice them. And that can be really reassuring. And we've had very interesting participation and interaction with people saying, wow, I never thought about this. I never thought I was a violent person. I was just looking at how many violent reactions I've had in a day. That was one of the things. And just jot down that, for example. And people came along and said, wow, I never thought I had that. So many, in one day, so many violent responses to by people around me. So the campaign is that out there. It's called Senderos, SENDEROS.VE. I will write it in the chat, and if Ashish maybe can let it share it with you. Would love to see you and hear you on them. Thank you. Any other questions?
Nayan sir, your mic is still on mute. Kindly unmute yourself. सर फोन में सर म्यूट बटन होगा सर फोन पे आगे देखिए वहां म्यूट बटन होगा हाँ वहां पे वहीं पे आवाज नहीं आ रही है सर आपकी सर आपकी आवाज नहीं आ रही है I think there is some technical issue with Narayan
तब तक आप दूसरे तब तक आप नेक्स्ट स्पीकर को इनवाइट कीजिए
so So our next speaker is Dr. Shobha Kujur. She is professor at Chatra College. So I would like to invite Dr. Shobha Kujurji to, to give her deliveration.
Good evening and Jharkhandi Johar to all of you. I think that I am comfortable to speak in Hindi, so my speech is in Hindi. I request Narayan sir to conclude in English after my speech. Narayan sir, मैं आज आदिवासियों के बीच बापू इस टॉपिक पे बोलने जा रही हूँ और मैं धन्यवाद देती हूँ नारायण सर को जिन्होंने मुझे ये अवसर दिया कि आप सभी के बीच कोविड-19 जो काफ़ी महामारी का दौर है और ऐसे समय में हम आप सभी के बीच हैं और मैं धन्यवाद देती हूँ और अपने वक्तव्य को आगे बढ़ाते हुए मैं आप सभी को थोड़ा-सा आदिवासियों के बीच गांधी जी की क्या रोल रही है, मैं आप सभी को परिचित कराना चाहती हूँ। पूरी दुनिया में महात्मा गांधी के आदर्शों को याद किए जा रहे हैं। जगह-जगह पर कार्यक्रम आयोजित किए जा रहे हैं, जिसके माध्यम से लोग गांधी के आदर्शों पर चलने का संकल्प ले रहे हैं। लेकिन इसी बीच एक ऐसी आदिवासी समुदाय है, जो आज भी गांधी कि आदर्शों को न केवल अक्षरशः अपने जीवन में पालन करते हैं, बल्कि उसे जीते हैं। जी हाँ, आपने सही समझा। मैं टाना भगत की बात कर रही हूँ और मैं भी टाना भगत परिवार से ही हूँ। टाना भगत समुदाय जो झारखंड के छोटा नागपुर इलाके में विशेष रूप से रहते हैं, गांधी जी के प्रिय रहे हैं। आजादी के 74 साल बाद भी टाना भगत में गांधी का प्रभाव कायम है। इनका जीवन महात्मा गांधी का जीता जागता दर्शन है। गांधी को अगर ढूंढना है, राष्ट्रपिता का साक्षात दर्शन करना है, तो आप टाना भगत के बीच चले आइए। कुछ रीति रिवाज जो हैं टाना भगतों का, वो बिल्कुल हमारे राष्ट्रीय झंडा से जुड़ी हुई हैं। सुबह की शुरुआत होती है तिरंगे की पूजा से। टाना भगत रोजाना तिरंगे की पूजा करते हैं, बल्कि यूँ कह लें कि उनकी सुबह की शुरुआत तिरंगे की पूजा के साथ होती है। उनके आंगन में पूरे वर्ष भर तिरंगा फहरता रहता है। तिरंगा को ही टाना भगत अपना आदर्श मानते हैं। गांधी टोपी है टाना भगत की पहचान। महात्मा गांधी हमेशा कहा करते थे कि असली भारत गाँव में बसता है, गाँव का विकास देश का विकास है। टाना भगत गांधी के आदर्शों को अक्षरशः पालन करते हुए आज भी गांधी टोपी और बदन पर कपड़े के नाम पर जनेऊ और धोती धारण करते हैं और यही उनकी पहचान है। टाना भगत समुदाय ने महात्मा गांधी के चरखे और खादी को भी जीवित रखा है। टाना भगत आंदोलन और गांधी से संपर्क की छोटी सी मैं हिस्टोरिकल पार्ट पे आती हूँ। झारखंड के गुमला जिले के विशुनपुर प्रखंड के रहने वाले जतरा भगत ने सामंती व्यवस्था, साहूकारों और अंग्रेजी हुकूमत के खिलाफ 1914 में विद्रोह की शुरुआत की। आगे चलकर जतरा का आंदोलन टाना भगत आंदोलन के रूप में ले लिया। जतरा की गिरफ्तारी के बाद टाना भगत आंदोलन ने रफ्तार पकड़ा और आगे चलकर स्वतंत्रता आंदोलन का शुरुआत ले लिया। इसके बाद ही महात्मा गांधी के साथ टाना भगत संपर्क में आए। महात्मा गांधी की अगुवाई में 1922 में हुए कांग्रेस अधिवेशन और 1923 के नागपुर सत्याग्रह आंदोलन में बड़ी संख्या में टाना भगतों ने शामिल हुए। 1940 में रामगढ़ कांग्रेस में टाना भगतों ने महात्मा गांधी को 400 रुपये की एक थैली भेंट की थी। आज भी टाना भगत जल जंगल जमीन से जुड़े आंदोलन कर रहे हैं और झारखंड क्षेत्र में सीसीएल यहाँ पे जो माइनिंग कंपनी है उसके साथ अक्सर उनकी लड़ाई होती रहती है जमीन को लेकर के। आगे मैं बढ़ाते हुए, अपने वक्तव्य को बढ़ाते हुए मैं बताना चाहूँगी कि टाना भगत स्वच्छता के पुजारी भी होते हैं। आज भी टाना भगत के घर के आसपास अगर आप चले जाइए तो आप साफ-सुथरा पाएँगे। उनका मुख्य कारण है कि टाना भगतों का महात्मा गांधी के प्रति प्रेम और जतरा टाना भगत का संदेश है। टाना भगत परिवार के हर घर के आंगन में सादा झंडा व तिरंगा झंडा व तुलसी के पौधे और चबूतरा अनिवार्य रूप से होता है। टाना भगत समुदाय के लोग सुबह उठने के बाद अपने घर आंगन उसके आसपास सफाई करते हैं और उसके बाद नहा धोकर तिरंगे की पूजा करते हैं, तुलसी के पौधे पे पानी डालते हैं। उसके बाद घर का कोई काम वो करते हैं। आदिवासी समुदाय आज भी गांधी जी को अपने पर्व त्योहारों में याद करते हैं और उनसे संबंधित गाने गाते हैं। मैं एक छोटी सी एक गाने की प्रस्तुति है जो हमारे आदिवासी समाज में आज भी गांधी जी को कैसे याद करते हैं। आज कर्मा का त्योहार भी है लेकिन करम गाना मैं नहीं गा रही हूँ। जो गांधी जी से रिलेटेड गाने हैं उसी को मैं गा रही हूँ। छोटा सा कोरस है बस। बड़े बड़े सिपाही बंदूक से लड़ाए, गांधी बाबा कानून से लड़ाए रे, गांधी बाबा कानून से लड़ाए। बड़े बड़े सिपाही बंदूक से लड़ाए, गांधी बाबा कानून से लड़ाए रे, गांधी बाबा कानून से लड़ाए। एक कर्मा गाना भी मैं गाऊंगी क्योंकि आज करम का त्योहार है और नारायण सर ऐसे दिन में रखे हैं जहां मैं नहीं जा पा रही हूँ और आप लोग के साथ बैठी हूँ, लेकिन फिर भी मैं यहाँ से 8:30 बजे जब ये वेबिनार खत्म होगा तो मैं करम देखने जाऊंगी हमारे अखड़ा में। तो उससे संबंधित मैं थोड़े से गाना गाना चाहती हूँ जो करम का त्योहार है, इसी के लिए। सातो भैया रे सतो करम गाड़े, सातो भैया रे सतो करम गाड़े, सातो गोतनी सेवा कर रे, सातो गोतनी सेवा कर। बड़ भैया उपासल छोट भैया पियासल, बड़ भैया उपासल छोट भैया पियासल, मझला भैया करम का सेवा कर, मझला भैया करम का सेवा कर। अब मैं थोड़ा सा अभी जो स्थिति है टाना भगतों की उसके विषय में मैं आप सभी को परिचित कराना चाहती हूँ। आज़ादी के बाद से ही टाना भगत सरकार के साथ काफ़ी उसके साथ अंतर्विरोध रहा है। आज की जो परिस्थिति है टाना भगतों आज भी टाना भगत जल जंगल जमीन की लड़ाई लड़ रहे हैं और बहुतों के पास खतियान नहीं है, जिसके कारण उसकी जाति आवासीय जैसे प्रमाण पत्र नहीं बन पाते हैं। और अगर सीसीएल जमीन भी लेती है, यहाँ पे कोई भी खनन कंपनी जमीन लेती है तो वो खतियान नहीं जमा करने के कारण वो जमीन ऐसे ही चला जाता है। जो मुआवजा उनको मिलनी चाहिए या फिर जो नौकरी मिलनी चाहिए वो उसको नहीं मिल पाता है। और झारखंड की जो स्थिति है, क्योंकि वो लोग जो ये था जमीन का जो मुआवजा था वो नहीं देते थे, जिसके कारण उनकी जमीन नीलाम हो चुकी थी और आज तक बहुतों के पास खतियान नहीं है और ये काफ़ी प्रॉब्लम क्रिएट करता है। जो लाभ अभी मिलनी चाहिए नहीं मिल पा रही, जिसके कारण ये मुख्य धारा से जुड़ नहीं पा रहे हैं सही ढंग से। और जिला प्रशासन के द्वारा वन पट्टा जैसी चीज़ों को भी नहीं देने के कारण वो उनका लाभ नहीं ले पा रहे हैं। और मैं आग्रह करूंगी, हमारे बीच तुषार गांधी जी हैं और टाना भगत भी गांधी जी के फॉलोअर्स रहे हैं और मैं आग्रह करूंगी कि आप झारखंड आइए हमारे बीच में और
जी
झारखंड की रीति रिवाज और यहाँ के जो टाना भगत हैं आप उनसे मिलिए, क्योंकि वो अभी तक नहीं जानते होंगे कि उनके जो पीढ़ी है आज भी जीवित हैं। अगर आप आएंगे तो उनको अच्छा लगेगा। धन्यवाद।
जरूर, जरूर शोभा जी, शुक्रिया, जरूर आऊंगा।
ठीक है।
अ, मैं ये बताना चाहता हूँ कि ताना भगत के ऊपर मैंने 2010 में काम किया, रिसर्च किया। तो उस दरमियान मैंने ढूंढ रहा था कि ताना भगत के बीच में पढ़ी लिखी महिला या लड़की कौन है, उसको उससे मिलाया जाए। तो स्थानीय प्रशासन और एनजीओ ने मिलकर ये शोभा ताना भगत को मेरे सामने लाया। उस समय ये 17 जिला परिषद की सदस्य थी। बाद में ये अपनी पढ़ाई और आगे करके ये यूनिवर्सिटी में टीचर हो गई हैं। तो भारत में ये पहला ट्राइब है, अकेला ट्राइब है। इन इंडिया दिस इज द ओनली ट्राइब हु इज लिविंग द गांधीयन वे ऑफ लाइफ, truly following the Gandhian way of life, and that's why I call them living Gandhians, because they are not that educated, not that literate, but Gandhi ji went there during Ramgarh Congress, and he stayed there. Why he went there? Because there was a tussle between Pandit Nehru and Subhash Chandra Bose. So he skipped, instead of extending support to any of them. He skipped, and he went and stayed there for a day with this tribe, or you can say 2 days. And then in that impressed these tribes so much that they become tribal. And even today there is no dowry. Each day they spin charkha, and they wear dhoti which they make on themselves. So except salt, they do not buy anything. And around them there is all the Naxals will activities are going on. They will come and beat them, but never uh, they never return violence with violence. They just go for non-violence. And there are almost 50 case studies with me who uh, adopted the Gandhian way of life. Maybe now that has become 100. So that's why I request Tushar Gandhi ji to visit them whenever he find time. I will take him to among
जरूर,
these people. Though last time, maybe 10 or 12 years ago, when I was working with them, I tried to get their land returned. So somehow or other, some people may get, maybe by now it's 60% or 70% of the Tana Bhagat got their land back, but still there are 20 or 30% people, Tana Bhagats, who want that their land to be returned. So this is an important issue which I am always struggling with the state government, Jharkhand government now, but that is yet to be done. Yeah. Then there is another tribe I mentioned you about, that tribe in Champaran, and the third tribe is in Chhattisgarh also. But they remember Gandhi. They practice the bhajans and all that in their day-to-day life, but they are not spinning charkha. So they are not that. Uh, we cannot say, but there are three tribes in India, and all these tribes need your kind attention, so that they may feel, and they are waiting that someday Gandhi ji will come, and they will get liberated from the problems. The Tana Bhagat has a lot of problem. Though on my request or on my persuasion, now the state government has formed an authority for the development of Tana Bhagat. But the powers and all the processes are with the government. These people are, as uh, Shobha Kujur said, that most of them are not that much educated that they can go and talk to the district administration to get back their land. So that is very essential, that the remaining 30% population must get their land back, because their land were auctioned, because they fought for the freedom of the country, and they were part of the movement with Gandhiji. The car which Gandhiji used at that time, in last show we have shown that car also. So that car is still preserved, and we have preserved that car. That car is in Ranchi. So if when you come to Ranchi,
sure.
that car we will definitely show you. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I have a question for Mr. Narayan. What we understand in Jharkhand, we have Santals, we have Munda, we have Uraons. Tana Bhagat is a
Hmm.
different tribe, or they are part of some philosophy.
No, they are the tribe. Earlier they were Urao, but when they later on they become Tana Bhagat under the influence of Gandhi ji. They are called Tana. Tana has a different connotation. Means they are always Gandhi ji used to ring the bell during prayers. Now these people, whenever they will go, they are ringing bell everywhere. Whether they are walking or they are uh, just sitting, they
So
continue their ring.
they are only Uraons have become Tana Bhagat, or from
Ha.
other sub tribes like Santhal or Munda
No, no,
also. They
they are they
only
now
Uraons.
they are tribe.
Uraon,
They are tribe. They are not Urao. They are Tana Bhagat. In census, they are
वही मैं
Tana
शोभा
Bhagat.
कुजूर जी से वही मैंने
उरांव
जानना
उरांव
चाहता हूँ।
जनजाति में ही जी
एक अंग
उरांव
है।
जन
उरांव जनजाति में ही
उरांव
उरांव
जनजाति
जनजाति में ही
का एक
ताना
अंग है।
भगत के
हाँ।
जी
बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद शोभा कुजूर जी।
जी थैंक यू सर।
आगे नेक्स्ट स्पीकर।
Thank you very much, Sobha Kuchurji. So now our next speaker is Mr. William Westerman. He is PhD and Assistant Professor of Sociology and Anthropology in Jersey City University, USA. So I will request Mr. William Westerman for
मैं
his
जर्सी
kind
से बोल
deliveries.
रहा।
Hi, good evening, everyone. And I want to begin also by thanking Professor Narayan and all the organizers in the Society for Empowerment. It's a great honor to be with you again, and I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you. I have a slightly different setup from a couple weeks ago, so I hope that doesn't look too strange that I'm reading off the screen. I gave a presentation 3 weeks ago, and I'm going to pick up from there. 3 weeks ago, I talked about the impact of Gandhi on the American civil rights movement, inspired as I was then by the recent death of the icon of the civil rights movement, John Lewis, who had been president of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, known by its initials as SNCC. Lewis was among the most avowed and skilled proponents of nonviolence, an English word that was coined, in fact, by Gandhi. Lewis most notably used the technique of nonviolence in such historic campaigns as the campaign to desegregate lunch counters in the South, where blacks and whites had never been permitted to sit and eat together, the freedom rides to desegregate the interstate bus system, and most famously, the march from Selma, Alabama to Montgomery to demand full voting rights for Black American citizens. He was known especially not only for not responding to the violence and beatings he received, but with the great self-discipline of his training, focusing internally on trying to find love for his oppressors as they beat him, which to us seems an almost unimaginable feat, considering that he was clubbed several times on the head himself, sustained concussions, most notoriously at the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama. And this has been reenacted in the film Selma, which you may have seen. In the recently released documentary about his life called John Lewis Good Trouble, which is available, I hope, for streaming in India and in other countries, he is quoted as saying that he was arrested in 40 acts of civil disobedience during the civil rights movement. And he was arrested another 5 times after becoming a US congressman while protesting against apartheid in South Africa, among other causes. So even though he went to the US House of Representatives and the civil rights movement died down somewhat, he still continued to be active and to practice civil disobedience on a range of other causes. What I attempted to do in my earlier talk was to draw the lineage between Lewis and Gandhi, since Lewis was born in 1940 and would have been too young to visit India at that time, not to mention the fact that he came from a rural peasant sharecropping family, the American equivalent of a village or peasant upbringing among America's untouchable caste, as it were. What I found in my research is that India in general was a pilgrimage site for some of the early intellectuals of the civil rights movement, and Gandhian nonviolence was a particularly motivating and inspiring movement for Black Americans. Martin Luther King, who had just turned 19 when Gandhi was assassinated, visited India in 1959 to learn more about nonviolence. But James Lawson, who is still alive today and who was a mentor to Lewis and who trained him and others in nonviolent resistance techniques, spent 3 years in India in the 1950s after being released from a US prison for being a conscientious objector and refusing to serve in the Korean War. Both King and Lawson were mentored by the religious leader Howard Thurman, who traveled with his wife, Sue Bailey Thurman, and another couple for 4 months to India in 1935 and 1936, and who were the first African Americans to meet with Gandhi in February of 1936. They traveled all over India and what is now Pakistan and Sri Lanka, and also met with Tagore in January in Calcutta. That was followed, so that I talked about 3 weeks ago. But what I've learned since in continuing my research is that that was followed in 1937, the following year, by a visit from Benjamin Mays, another African American religious leader who went on to become not only a major figure in the civil rights movement himself, but also the president of Morehouse College, which is one of the most famous and prestigious historically Black colleges and universities, and also visited by Channing Tobias, a Howard University graduate who went on to become the chairman of the board of the well-known large African American organization known as the NAACP, one of the oldest and largest and most established African American civil rights organizations in the country, still exists today. It was no small feat, when you think of it, for three African American young men, church leaders and intellectuals, to travel to India in the 1930s when they would not even be allowed to sit on integrated buses or stay in integrated hotels in the American South at that time. I also discussed in my report several weeks ago that Bayard Rustin, an important aide to Martin Luther King during the 1950s and 1960s, and a major intellectual figure in his own right in the civil rights movement, both for the civil rights movement for African American rights, but also later on for LGBT rights, had also traveled to India to meet with Gandhi. Rustin, who was much younger, had been a key member of the Fellowship of Reconciliation and the Congress of Racial Equality, two American organizations based on the concept of integration, nonviolence, um, and drew from Quaker teachings, Quaker pacifist teachings. Both of these organizations also espoused Gandhian principles during the 1940s. And Rustin, interestingly enough, was also the head of the Fellowship of Reconciliation's Free India Committee in the mid 1940s. So he was active in working to build support in the United States for Indian independence from England. Rustin had read Krishnalal Sridharani's 1939 book, War Without Violence. Sridharani having been a protege of Gandhi, who was one of many arrested and jailed after the Salt March. Sridharani's book was based on his doctoral dissertation at Columbia University in New York. So we see much going back for that time, for the 1930s and 1940s, 1930s in particular, very unusual to have this kind of back and forth between the United States, Americans going to India and Indians coming and studying in the US. Not like today. Although Thurman had already been to India and met Gandhi and Tagore by the time War Without Violence came out, it was probably the book that introduced the next generation of civil rights leaders, including Martin Luther King, to Gandhian nonviolence. Rustin, who was a lifelong member of the Quaker faith, was also a conscientious objector who refused to report for the draft in 1943, and he spent the next 28 months in a federal prison rather than fight in World War II. It was after his release from prison that he led the Free India Committee. However, Rustin had planned his trip for 1948, but of course, unfortunately, Gandhi was assassinated before Rustin could arrive. Rustin went to India anyway, studied nonviolence for 7 weeks, and was able to meet with Nehru while he was in India. Thus, you had, by the early 1950s, 5 leaders of the civil rights movement who had all made a pilgrimage of one sort or another to India. Thurman, Mays, and Tobias had all met Gandhi personally. Lawson and Rustin had not, but both had spent time in prison as pacifist objectors to military service, and then went to India and studied nonviolence even further in India. Martin Luther King, his wife Coretta Scott King, and another important Black intellectual, Lawrence Reddick, traveled to India together in 1959 on a delegation to learn more about nonviolence. Thus, while the civil rights movement had already launched in earnest in the 1950s, the Montgomery bus boycott, for example, had already taken place by that point. The civil rights movement really picked up steam in the early 1960s. And by then, 8 of the significant African American leaders of the movement, all intellectuals and all from a middle class background, educated middle class background, had been to India as a source of inspiration and to some degree training and learning about nonviolence from the source. And of course, we say the source, but of course, Gandhi based some of his philosophy on Thoreau and on Tolstoy. So the ideas have been transnational ideas, and it's very interesting that that Gandhi was looking to Thoreau, and Americans like King and Thurman and Lawson and Rustin were looking to India. Thus, what I've tried to do and will continue to do with this research is to show that the connection between Gandhian nonviolence and the American civil rights movement was not just abstract, but was actually built on human contact by Americans who traveled to India to learn at the source. And it was not just that committing civil disobedience was the lesson. In fact, one of the strategies of the Freedom Riders, and of John Lewis and his cohort in particular, was to refuse to pay bail to the state in order to be released, an idea that built directly upon Gandhi and Satyagraha. The strategy of the American civil rights workers was that they would flood the jails, take up space with their bodies, endure the suffering with love because of what that endurance impressed upon the minds of their jailers, and force a reckoning with the authorities over the unjust laws without conceding any points or bargaining for release. Interestingly, John Lewis did not go to India himself, coming from a much poorer rural background than the others, until he was elected to the US House of Representatives, when he led a delegation in 2009 to commemorate the 50th anniversary of Dr. King's trip there. Lewis came back from the trip with an idea to establish a federal Gandhi King Fellowship that would support research on nonviolence, exchange programs between American and Indian students and universities working on nonviolence, and additionally raise money for organizations doing social welfare work within India. Though his bill was introduced 5 times between 2009 and 2019 in the US House of Representatives, it has never passed, and the fellowship remains to be created. I understand there's a new push now to try to create this, to pass the bill and create this fellowship in his memory now that Lewis has passed. Finally, I would like to just say that, as you well know, the US has been gripped by mostly nonviolent protests in the wake of an intolerable level of police killing of innocent African Americans. I'm sure, as Tushar Sir said, that you've heard of the Black Lives Matter movement, a movement that is a new civil rights movement that is picking up on the work and the social transformation that remained unfinished at the end of the last period. One of the things that has taken many people by surprise is the spontaneity of Black Lives Matter, and what kind of movement building will take place as a result and following from this initial uprising remains to be seen. Few of the giants of the civil rights movement are still alive, although remarkably, as I said, James Lawson is still active at the age of 91. But this is a time for new giants to emerge, and also to resist the temptation always to look for giants as opposed to looking for strength in the thousands at the grassroots level. It remains a Gandhian paradox that one humble person can generate and inspire so much nonviolent action, which really requires the participation of thousands to bring about progress. This history is still being written every day. In the midst of the pandemic, thousands of people have gone out into the street to march for peace, to march for nonviolence, to demand dignity and the respect of the state, and an end to the excess violence by the police against their own people. I would like to add that it's not that the activists are meeting hate with hate, which is what is often portrayed in the media and especially exaggerated by the Republicans, by President Trump. And I also disagree with, respectfully disagree, with the idea that that these individuals are not evolved enough to employ Gandhian tactics. Rather, I would suggest that the movement has developed so suddenly that it has done so without strategy thus far. We forget that before the civil rights movement, and this is my main point, very important point, that's often forgotten. That before the civil rights movement began, there were several years of just organizing and strategizing. There were centers like the Highlander School and other organizing centers. There were teach-ins. There were seminars on nonviolent practice at Fisk University. James Lawson led them. That's where John Lewis was trained. Rosa Parks was trained at Highlander. Martin Luther King was trained at Highlander. So there were several years before anything happened publicly of just organizing and strategizing. It was a movement that was as much intellectual and disciplined as it was reactive. And we have not had those years of strategizing in this country at this point. As of now, that organizing has not taken place to the same degree. You do see more of that strategy, in fact, within the immigrants' rights movement, say, the undocumented students and the so-called dreamers who have been organizing to get legal status and to have their civil rights despite not having resident papers. But Black Lives Matter has emerged in response to unpredicted killings. George Floyd's killing, the shooting just recently in Kenosha, Wisconsin, the Breonna Taylor shooting, rather than an envisioned, objective-oriented campaign as the civil rights movement was, as indeed Gandhi's movement was. Is Gandhi as well known in the US as he should be? Is he studied as a post-colonial intellectual figure? I'm afraid not so much, at least not outside of pacifist Quaker circles and peace studies programs. John Lewis saw the enormous need and potential in this, and it is up to all of us activists and scholars today, and teachers, educators, to carry on that work in partnership with many others to make the dream of full civil rights for all a reality. And a big piece of that is educational work. Not so much, as Tushar Sir said, to put Gandhiji on a pedestal, but to learn from his philosophy and strategy and apply those lessons to the current day and apply those lessons to us internally as well as to the external world. And with that, I'll close my remarks today and thank you again for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. William Westerman. So, I would like to tell you all that Honorable Arun Gandhi sir has joined us. So we welcome him from Society of Empowerment. Narayan sir.
Yes. Have, uh, yes, joined. Has he joined?
Yeah, he has joined. He has joined.
Okay. So I welcome Dr. Arun Gandhi ji on behalf of Society for Empowerment, as well as on our personal behalf, on behalf of the team, and on behalf of all the intellectuals, academicians who took part and who are taking part in this webinar. So you are most welcome, sir, and we feel um, we are very happy that you are with us.
So
Now we
we have
can.
Nayan sir. We have Arun sir's deliberation is at 8 p.m. So around
Uh,
10-15 minutes left, and we have two speakers also, Bhairav Lal ji and Shivani ji. So I'll request Bhairav Lal ji to deliver his speech in 5 minutes, just 5 minutes.
जी बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद। मैं अपने को आज गौरवान्वित महसूस कर रहा हूं। मैं इस वेबिनार में भाग ले रहा हूं जहां एक तरफ अरुण गांधी सर बैठे हुए हैं, दूसरी ओर तुषार गांधी सर बैठे हुए हैं। मैं कुछ चीजें सिर्फ कहने की अनुमति चाह रहा हूं। मैं पिछले 10 सालों से चंपारण में गांधी द्वारा किए गए कार्यों का अध्ययन कर रहा हूं और आज जो वेबिनार रखी गई है उसका संदर्भ भी मैं चंपारण गांधी से लेना चाहता हूं। एक चीज मैं शुरू में ही स्पष्ट कर देना चाहता हूं, जो गांधी द्वारा चंपारण में किए गए कार्यों के काफी रिसर्च हुए हैं, काफी पब्लिकेशंस हुए हैं, लेकिन अभी भी कस्तूरबा गांधी के द्वारा किए गए कार्यों की ओर लोगों का ध्यान कम गया है। मैं उस पर भी काम कर रहा हूं। खास करके भितरवा आश्रम में जो कस्तूरबा गांधी द्वारा काम किए गए थे, जो लोगों के बीच अवेयरनेस क्रिएट किया गया था, जो फियरलेस की बातें की गई थी, महिलाओं के एम्पावरमेंट और एजुकेशन, हेल्थ और सैनिटेशन की बातें की गई थी और जो कार्य किए गए थे उसकी ओर मैं अधिक ध्यान आपका आकृष्ट करने की कोशिश करूंगा। लेकिन इससे पहले कि मैं अपनी बात शुरू करूं, 17 फरवरी 1917 को राजकुमार शुक्ल नामक एक किसान ने जो महात्मा गांधी को चिट्ठी लिखी थी, उसमें उन्होंने वर्ल्ड पीस की झलक दिखाई थी। राजकुमार शुक्ल ने गांधी को लिखा था, जो जो चीजें टॉलस्टॉय ने सिर्फ सैद्धांतिक रूप से किया था, आपने दक्षिण अफ्रीका में उसे व्यवहारिक रूप से कर दिया था। मेरे कहने का मतलब ये है, ये मैं कहना चाहता हूं, जो सैद्धांतिक बातें गांधीयन संदर्भ में अधिक होती है या लोग करते हैं, लेकिन वही अमर होंगे या उन्हीं की बातें बहुत दिनों तक सुनी जाएंगी जो व्यवहारिक रूप में गांधी के आदर्शों को, गांधी द्वारा किए गए कार्यों को फिर से दोहराने की कोशिश करेंगे। एक कलेक्शन ऑफ इंफॉर्मेशन की बात होती है। आज वर्ल्ड पीस का एक बहुत बड़ा चैलेंज है, जो सिटीजन टू सिटीजन लोगों की बातें नहीं हो पा रही है और लोग एक दूसरे की समस्याओं के बारे में, सूचनाओं के बारे में आदान प्रदान नहीं कर रहे हैं। ये एक बहुत बड़ा थ्रेट है। हमें सभी नागरिकों को, जो वर्ल्ड पीस के प्रमोटर्स होते हैं, उनके आपस में चीजों को साझा करने की कोशिश करनी चाहिए। महात्मा गांधी ने चंपारण में हमें एक बहुत बड़ी सीख दी थी, जो उनकी भी बातें सुनो जिनके विरुद्ध बातें की जा रही हो। उस समय में इंडिगो फार्मर्स के बारे में या फिर जो ब्रिटिश ऑफिसर के थे, उनके विरुद्ध शिकायतें दर्ज होती थी। गांधी ने कहा जो नहीं, पहले उनका भी पक्ष रखने दिया जाए। गांधी उन इंडिगो फार्मर्स के घर पर जाते थे। उन्होंने वो उन ब्रिटिश ऑफिसर्स के घर पर जाकर के उनकी बातें पक्ष सुनी, उनका पक्ष जानने की कोशिश किया और ये हमें वर्ल्ड पीस की ओर आगे बढ़ाने की बातें करती है। गांधी ने एक बड़ा आदर्श हमें चंपारण में ये दिखाया था, यदि रूल्स आपके नैरो हों, यदि आइडियोलॉजी आपके नैरो हों, तो उन नैरो को उसको आपको विस्तार करने की जरूरत है। गांधी ने 18 अप्रैल 1917 को एसडीओ जॉर्ज चंदर की कोर्ट में जो बयान दिया था, जो उन्होंने तकरीर की थी, उससे हमें एक बड़ा एक लाइट मिलता है। तो जहां पर में हमारे रूल्स कमजोर पड़ते हैं या जो हमें जनजीवन के लिए वो फायदेमंद नहीं होते हैं, उससे ऊपर उठने की जरूरत होती है। आज वर्ल्ड पीस के कंटेक्स्ट में हमें यह भी देखने की जरूरत है, यदि फियरलेसनेस, जैसा कि अभी तुषार गांधी ने अपने इनॉग्रल स्पीच में कहा था, तो यदि हम ये समझते हैं जो बिना ट्रूथफुलनेस के, बिना फियरलेसनेस के हम आगे बढ़ जाएंगे, तो शायद ये हमारी कल्पना उतनी अच्छी नहीं होगी। आज वर्ल्ड पीस में हमें गांधीयन उस आइडियोलॉजी को दोहराने की जरूरत है, जो हमें एक डर से ऊपर उठने की जरूरत है, चाहे वो डर कितने भी शक्तिशाली के सामने में क्यों नहीं हो। हमें गांधी जी ने जो आदर्श दिखाया था उस पर हमें चलने की जरूरत है, लेकिन वह हमें तभी पीस रुकेगा जब सस्टेनेबल डेवलपमेंट की बातें होगी। तुषार गांधी जी ने इन्वायरमेंट की ओर इशारा किया था। हमें गांधी जी ने चंपारण में हेल्थ के बारे में, सैनिटेशन के बारे में, एजुकेशन के बारे में, अर्निंग के बारे में जो हमें राहें दिखाई थी, बरहड़वा लखनसेन और भितरवा के आश्रम की स्थापना के समय में उन्होंने जो एजुकेशन को लेकर के जो उनकी परिकल्पना थी, उनके बारे में जो बातें हमें बताई थी, आज 100 साल के बाद भी हमें फिर से उन आदर्शों की ओर लौटने की जरूरत है और वही आदर्श हमें वर्ल्ड पीस का रास्ता और प्रशस्त करेगा। मुझे लगता है जो अभी बहुत सारे हमें बातें सुननी है, इसलिए मैं आप सब लोगों को फिर से एक बार धन्यवाद दे करके अपनी बात समाप्त करता हूँ।
थैंक यू भैरव लाल जी, थैंक यू वेरी मच। भैरव लाल दास जी, आपने बहुत अच्छा बात अच्छी अच्छी बातें आपने बताई, कुछ फैक्ट्स आपने दिए. But the Society for Empowerment has also organized one webinar on Kasturba Gandhi ji. And there is one university named after Kasturba Gandhi, which is delayed because of this COVID-19. Otherwise, that would have been started. So we have just started one university that is known as Kasturba Gandhi University, and that is placed at the same place where Gandhi ji and Kasturba Gandhi formed a institution for basic education. That school is still there, and the well created by Kasturba Gandhi and Gandhi ji by Shramdan is still there, but that needs attention of the government. And I will again request Arun Gandhi ji and Tushar Gandhi ji to visit at least that place where Kasturba Gandhi ji lived and tried to transform the life of the local people, especially the tribals and the rural people, especially the tribals and the rural women. And those women are still remembering. And Kasturba Gandhi is very much live in the folk songs and folk tales of the area where that school is located. So that will be a good work if Arun Gandhi ji and they comes to that place and they visit that place. They stay for a day or two there. We we are ready to organize their visit. We will organize provided if they give some date. Then it will be something good revival of the Gandhi visit to and Kasturba Gandhi visit and work. It will be a good thing. Now we can go for the next speaker, or if there is any observation, it's most welcome.
So before the valedictory session by Arun Gandhi ji, I will like to request our last speaker for today, Shivani ji. Shivani ji, hello Shivani ji. Shivani ji, are you connected? I think there is some technical issue with Shivani ji.
Hmm.
It's an answer.
Okay, then you request for the valedictory.
Yeah, yeah. So now for valedictory session, we would like to invite Honorable Arun Gandhi ji. Arun Gandhi ji, an Indian American socio-political activist, fifth grandson of Mahatma Gandhi ji. He worked for Times of India for more than 30 years, and in 1991 he started MK Gandhi Institute of Nonviolence in US. He's a renowned author and scholar. So we request respected Arun Gandhi ji to start his valedictory session.
Hello, everybody. I'm very happy and honored to be among all of you and to be speaking to a vast audience like yours. I'm also honored and pleased that this is the first time in 86 years of my life that my son and I are on the same platform for the same seminar. He's given the inaugural address and I'm giving the valedictory address. And that's not the only thing. We also have our best friend, Veronica from Venezuela, who's the icing on the cake for us. So in a sense, this is a family affair. And of course, the family believes that Gandhi is always relevant and will always be relevant, not only because he is our grandfather, but because it makes a lot of sense that his philosophy is based on the very foundation of love, respect, understanding, acceptance, and appreciation. It's only when we understand that, that love is the basis of this whole philosophy. And that is why he insisted that in nonviolence, we don't have any enemies. We have friends who are misguided and need to be transformed. So his whole mindset was that I'm not fighting an enemy, I am transforming a friend. So it's only when we have that kind of a mindset that we would really be able to understand the philosophy and practice it effectively. I have heard a little bit about some of the other speakers who talked about what's going on in the world today, and especially here in the United States. And it always troubles me because even scholars, I feel, have looked at this philosophy simply as a philosophy for conflict resolution and not an overall philosophy. Um, Although grandfather used it in India just to get independence for India, and Dr. King used it in the United States to get civil rights for his people, and everybody else who has used it in the world have used it for one specific reason, and that is to either get independence or get equality for their people. But this philosophy is much more than a weapon for conflict resolution. It is about personal transformation. It is how we understand and how we live the philosophy. You cannot live in a culture of violence, a culture of violence that is so deeply rooted in us that it has overtaken every aspect of our lives. Our sports, entertainment, our speech, our relationships, our education, our religion, everything is controlled by the culture of violence. And when we live in that culture of violence, it is difficult for us to occasionally practice nonviolence and achieve success in it. We may in some cases achieve some success, but that would not really be a true success. It will only be a small victory. The true success is when we are able to focus on the problem instead of the person, and resolve the problem. In a culture of violence, we are taught just the opposite. We are taught to punish the person, and that will take care of the problem. And we have seen over the generations that it has not really taken care of any problems. Whatever we think has been resolved is not really been resolved. It's still there uh, to uh, to torment society. Even World War II, we fought World War II because of Hitler and because of all the hate that he was practicing and promoting. We destroyed millions of lives and billions of dollars worth of property. We got rid of Hitler and we got rid of his Nazi army, but we did not get rid of the hate and prejudice that he espoused. So that is what the culture of violence teaches us. We get rid of the person, but we never get rid of the problem. Whereas the culture of nonviolence focuses more on the problem rather than the person. And that is how we, even in the independence struggle in India, grandfather always talked about uh, the British being our friends and not our enemies. And so he was able to get the British involved in focusing on the problem and getting rid of some of the problems. Now, he didn't achieve complete success in the freedom struggle is another matter. And that was because of political reasons and and the overpowering culture of violence, which did not want him to succeed in his practice. And therefore, we had a lot of violence and the division of the country. And the result of that is what we are suffering today. So we need to understand uh, what nonviolence really is. And we need to understand what civilization really is. Today, our concept of civilization is richness and education. We think that a country that is rich and a country that has a lot of university graduates is the most civilized country in the world. But it is not. We see the most civilized country, the United States, so called civilized country, is also the most savage country in the world. The savagery that is taking place here today in the streets of the United States and in many other and in our relationship with the rest of the world is unbelievable. And so we need to understand what do we really mean by civilization. Gandhi's concept of civilization was where there is love and understanding and compassion and harmony among people, where we can all live in peace and harmony with each other. Peace is not the absence of war. Just because we are not at war with anybody or we are not fighting anybody doesn't really mean that we are living in peace. Peace is only achievable when we create that harmony in society where all of us live with respect and love and compassion for each other. And that is lacking today. We don't see that very much in our national and international relationships. Today, because of our materialistic lifestyle, and everywhere in the world we have adopted this materialistic lifestyle, where money and possessions is the most important thing in life. And that's why we are all scrambling individually and collectively, scrambling to get riches. We want to get rich. We want to make millions. We want to be able to buy all the wonderful things available in the market. And so that is a measure of success. And we have to realize that that kind of materialism is destructive. It's not constructive. It makes us selfish and greedy, and we think only about ourselves. And so nations think about themselves, and we have this whole miserable concept of patriotism, that we need to be patriotic to our country and our world. And that gives us the impression that we can preserve our part of the world with arms and ammunition and armies and all that kind of thing, and not be concerned about the rest of the world. But no country in the world can enjoy stability and security if the rest of the world is going down the drain. However powerful we may be, we will all go down the drain along with the rest of the world uh, because we have not done anything to help them. So the stability and security of any country depends on the stability and security of the whole world. And it is only when we have that relationship with the rest of the world, where we are all helping each other to attain a good standard of, reasonably good standard of living, then we will have peace in the world. But as long as we ignore the rest of the world and ignore the disparities and ignore the hardships and difficulties, not only within the country but outside the country with the world, we are never going to live in peace. We are never going to be able to achieve peace. And that is what was troubling grandfather. And that is what he said, that this philosophy of nonviolence teaches us to change ourselves. He expected that each individual, each one of us, will make that attempt to improve ourselves, to change ourselves. You know, Socrates said that an unexamined life is not worth living. And that is true. We exist today. We exist from morning till evening. Every morning we get up and do the same routine things all day long and go to bed the next, and then get up the next day and do the same thing over again. That is existence. That is not living. Living is when we make our lives meaningful, not only to us, but meaningful to people around us and to our neighborhood. And if each one of us attempts to do that, then we will be able to create that harmony and peace that grandfather wanted in this world. So it is a question of, first of all, understanding what do we mean by violence. You know, we have again a very distorted view of violence. We think violence is only the fighting and wars and killings and beatings that take place in society, and that as long as we are not killing anybody, we are non-violent people. I feel very pained by all the protests that go on today in the United States and other parts of the world, uh, where people come out in the streets and shout angry slogans and you know, display a lot of anger and frustration. And that is the point at which somebody can infiltrate the ranks and cause an incident and create violence there. And so the people who organize this protest have to realize that they have to make sure that their movement is not sidetracked or hijacked by people and uh, give it a bad name. This is something that one has to be very alert about. And that is why in the earlier civil rights movement, they went through all that training. And it's very important for people to be trained before they go into any kind of action. You know, without training, you can't really um, achieve the goals that one expects to achieve. There was a very interesting an episode in grandfather's life, which happened in 1913 before he left South Africa to come back to India. He launched a movement in South Africa against all the prejudices there. And as he always did in his movement, he made it all public. He announced it in the press and he announced what he was going to do, where he was going to do it, why he was going to do it. Everything was made public there. And after the whole thing was publicized, the next day the workers of the South African railways decided to go on a strike. And they announced that, and when grandfather read this in the papers, he realized that this strike is going to be more important for the government to deal with than his movement. And so he didn't want to put additional pressure on the government. So he announced that he is withdrawing his campaign until the strike the strike is over. The leadership of the strike came to grandfather and said, look, strike is a legitimate non-violent weapon. We are fighting a non-violent struggle also, and we are fighting a common enemy. So why don't you join us and we can strengthen each other? And grandfather said, first thing, I don't have an enemy. I am not fighting an enemy. I'm trying to transform a friend. The second thing is that you have a different agenda. I have a different agenda. So you go ahead and do what you have to do, and then I will do what I have to do. And so the strike went on the next day, and there was the usual anger and frustration and pointing fingers and showing the fist and all of that in the streets. So it was very easy for the police and the administration to infiltrate their ranks and cause an incident that gave them the opportunity to crush the strike with extreme violence. And then grandfather launched his campaign, and for weeks the prisons were filled up with people who quietly protested without any anger and frustration, and they allowed the police to arrest them and take them to prisons. And when the prisons were all filled to capacity, that is when General Smuts, who was the prime minister of the country, invited grandfather to come and negotiate a peace deal. And at that time, General Smuts confessed to grandfather. And he said, I could deal with the strike because there was so much anger and frustration there. And I could crush them with more violence. But he says, I don't know how to crush you because you are so loving and respectful and compassionate that I don't know how to crush you. And that is the crux of the philosophy of nonviolence, that we don't give the opponent the reason to crush us violently if we don't show anger and frustration. So these are aspects of his philosophy that we have to remember and try to live them, because unless we live them and make it a part of our lives, we will never be able to practice them randomly. So, the philosophy is more about personal transformation rather than political conflict resolution. These are some thoughts that I thought I would share with all of you in this attempt to understand grandfather's philosophy and make it more viable. I want to thank the organizers of this conference for giving me the honor to give the valedictory address and for organizing this wonderful international gathering. I wish all of you good luck in whatever you are doing. I wish that all of you will give some thought to the message that I have. I'm not saying that I have the right understanding of the message, but this is my interpretation of my grandfather's philosophy, and I may be wrong. So I am willing to be corrected by anyone who has a better idea. And so this is a gathering where we are all sharing our experiences and through those experiences, learning from each other. So I wish all of you good luck in your ventures, and I hope someday that I'll be able to come to India and I'll be able to accept the invitation to go to Champaran along with Tushar and see the wonderful work that is being done there. I wish I could go to every place that there is some wonderful work going on, but at 86 now, it's not going to be very feasible for me. So I should, well, again, thank you all and wish you all the best of luck.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gandhi.
Thank you.
We are we are very we feel enlightened by your talk, and you have really interpreted and given a guideline to us to move forward. And when we meet next, perhaps there will be more clarity. And when you will come to Champaran, and my request will be to visit at least Tana Bhagat, a Tana Bhagat that is close to Ranchi, then you will realize how Tana Bhagat and the Tharus are still living the life of Gandhi. They are the living Gandhians, and without reading any book, they have just uh, seen their grandfather with Gandhiji, and Gandhiji is still live in their life, in their folklore, in their folk songs, in their folk tales. So this is something very great, which we find in these rural India, in tribal India, especially among these tribes. So I would like to request you that whenever you have a plan to visit next time, please let us know. We will come with you and we will show at least at least the Tana Bhagat and the uh, Champaran, because there is there is a banyan tree under which Gandhiji used to sit, and he used to uh, listen the complaint of the farmers there. So that place I visited first of all in 1972, and
Hmm.
now when I went there in this 2020, I found that now the whole land, open land has turned into a building. There is now no space, only that tree is still there. So I said, those people who were living there, I narrated the whole scene there and story about how Gandhiji was brought by that uh, Shuklaji to Champaran, and then how Gandhiji used to sit in that tree and he used to take note of their complaint, or you can say their need. It was the need of the time, those days. So Gandhiji was, people never considered Gandhiji an outsider. And
ना नया से
Gandhiji, हाँ,
हेडफोन को थोड़ा माउथ के पास रख लीजिए, आवाज ब्रेक हो रहा है।
अच्छा, अच्छा, and Gandhiji also considered them as a family member. And Kasturba Gandhi was like head of the family for those tribals and those villagers where Gandhiji used to live. So still they feel that what Kasturba Gandhi told them to maintain, how to maintain cleanliness, how to maintain how to cook the food, and how to spin the charkha. All that is they remember and they will narrate you. And the most interesting part that you will find is that there are several folk songs in Bhojpuri. Bhojpuri is a dialect,
Hmm.
in which they still they are requesting Gandhiji to come again to liberate them from this differential development. There is the development is at different level. The equality in the society is not there. So still they believe that if Gandhiji comes again, all that the economic disparity, the social disparity, the problem in health, all that will be solved. So if you come to visit to that place, at least they will get satisfied that at least the grandson of Gandhiji has come. I think that most probably they will consider you as Gandhiji itself, and they will not allow you to leave that place so easily. they have to be convinced that now you have very little time. So the people are so much crazy to and waiting still for visit of Gandhiji. So thank you very much that you accepted my invitation and uh, made it uh, to be with us, and hope that in future also we will be getting both of you, Tushar and yours, uh, uh, guidelines, guidance, and the action plan on which we should try to act upon. Thank you very much to all the participants. Now नीरज जी, एक शिवानी जी छूट गई थी ना, वो आ गई है शायद, कनेक्ट हो
जी
गई हैं.
जी, तो वी रिक्वेस्ट शिवानी जी फॉर टू गिव
वोट ऑफ थैंक्स कर दे.
वोट ऑफ थैंक्स। या शिवानी जी, आप अनम्यूट कर लीजिए खुद को।
आज आप लोगों ने इस कार्यक्रम में सभी को का धन्यवाद, खासकर गांधी जी के पोते तुषार गांधी, अरुण गांधी जी का, जिन्होंने कार्यक्रम में भाग लिया और सोसाइटी फॉर एम्पावरमेंट की तरफ से इसका आयोजन किया गया था। आपका बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद इस कार्यक्रम में भाग लेने के लिए।
Thank you very much to all of you, respected Arun Gandhi ji, Tushar Gandhi ji, Devi Prakash Sinha sir, Shobha Kunjur ji, Veronica ji, Bhairav Lal Das ji, William Westerman जी, शिवानी जी, एस नारायण सर, आप सभी इस कार्यक्रम में आए, उसके लिए सोसाइटी फॉर एम्पावरमेंट की तरफ से आप सभी को हार्दिक धन्यवाद। Many thanks to all of you on behalf of Society for Empowerment. Thank you very much.